my name is Iuliia. Yeah, I will be standing. So, and also I feel a bit anxious because I think I haven't presented in face-to-face environment for a while and just was home alone in my screen, and now there are like people around. So, but hopefully it's okay. Yeah, I'm a doctoral researcher in Tampere University, as I said, and I'm now presenting something from my dissertation. I'm not sure it falls under one chapter, but there are here and there some reflections that I had and tried to organize. Now it's in empirical chapters, analytical chapters. Yeah, so first a little bit about myself. So I'm doing my PhD research on university politics and governance, and I situate myself in the field of critical university studies. So I basically look at the university from the political economy critique and try to see what is happening with the contemporary university, with a lot of talk on neoliberalization of academia and capitalist restructuring. And I kind of see that these processes of neoliberalization are transnational, but then they are kind of translated differently into specific contexts. And then, for example, critical university studies, they're mostly talking about, Western universities. I think it started mostly from the English university, which undergone this kind of privatization or commercialization, or like there are different concepts that is around these processes, but it's mostly about Western universities, and then it's it underpins a specific political and economic context. And I'm more interested what is going on in the post-socialist universities. I specifically look into the Russian universities, but then I also try to destabilize a little bit these territorial boundaries, because if transnational neoliberalization processes are transnational, and then some political processes are also transnational, then of course the research goes outside Russian borders. So the context, especially, I'm interested in the Russian universities and beyond, and then there are some ghosts of socialist past, of the Soviet past. What does it do with the universities and with the neoliberal transition? There is also the context of authoritarian politics and political regime by the state. Extreme state control in the Russian universities, which fall, they're all mostly public universities, and then kind of represent the governmental, they reflect the governmental ways of governing, sorry for for repeating myself, of governing country, and then how territorial governance is also done in Russia. It also represents in the governance of Russian universities. And then I specifically look into the everyday, so how these processes of neoliberalization in the context of authoritarian politics and post-socialist realities, what do they mean in the everyday life of academics and students, in their work environments, teaching environments, learning environments. And I draw from different ethnographic methods, and this is just the pictures of the university, like my path from within the institutions of higher education. I studied in Ulyanovsk State University. I did my bachelor's there. It's a peripheral university in Russia. And then I did my master's in St. Petersburg State University, which is one of the most resourceful and close to the government universities in Russia. It's under the special status by the president. And then now I'm doing PhD in Tampere University, which is kind of in the West, but then also Finland is a bit, might be referred as peripheral Western European country. So I'm utilizing the concept of assemblage and assembling, and try to see the field of higher education as a relational network of different connections and elements, semiotic and material, that come together and then become a contemporary university. And then I see assemblage always as a mechanism of power. So there are different power mechanisms at play that kind of choose specific components to come into the assemblage and then, build the university. This is just the picture of, because assemblage theory and methods kind of try to deal with the complexity and with the relational manner of any phenomenon. So I tried different methodologies. For example, besides interviews, I asked some participants to do maps of their experience in higher education. So this is, for example, one of the map. This is actually from the Finnish context. It's in English, so I posted it in English because almost all of them are in Russian. So it kind of underpins different components. You could see, for example, work environments and buildings and more kind of material components as money or funding, and then home, laptop, or even forest, what their higher education experience consists of. So there are different power mechanisms at play, but what I'm looking at is, first of all, neoliberalization and kind of this capitalist ideology of competitiveness, which, as I argue afterwards, is always already privileged, and then sustain resources in particular pockets of the assemblage, and then prevents of distributing resources in the field. And that's why I'm also very interested in the core-periphery dynamic. And then I think it was also visible when I presented my own journey within university structure, how resources are distributed. But then this core-periphery, I don't see them as a static formation that something is a core and then periphery, but rather this interchanged dynamic. What is kind of more resourceful. These kind of more resourceful pockets in the assemblage, they're not sometimes very, they're about territory and space, but then sometimes in some spaces you would find pockets of this resourceful capital accumulation within academia, even though it's in the periphery. And it's across borders, so there is this kind of West-East dynamic, and then accumulation of resources in the Western universities, and what does it mean for the Russian academics, and how they, from one side, strive for the participation, to the belonging to the practices of the Western academia, because that's how they accumulate cultural capital, which then translate into actual material capital. And then there are inequalities embedded within patriarchy, gender inequalities, which is also sustained and amplified by the neoliberalization, which is something I only start to look at in my dissertation, because this kind of core periphery, I've already written on it, and received some comments, and then kind of this more gender inequality is what I'm just starting now. And then in this, now I'm just talking about academic labor, even though I look how these power mechanisms changed other areas or spaces of academic life, but then now I'm more focusing on the academic labor. So if it starts with the center-periphery dynamics, I kind of now I omit or don't talk that much about West and East category. I think it's more straightforward in a way, yes. Then, people are expected to perform some activities that are international. International means Western, and that's how they, as I said, increase their capital in the academia, and then that's how also, for example, ranking mechanisms, international rankings and rankings like local rankings within the institution work. So basically you would need some kind of experience. There is a list of requirements that you need to do in order to, receive a specific wage, for example, or some bonuses, and then they would include some Western conferences and stuff like this. But it's more straightforward, but then there is also the center-periphery dynamics within Russia, and this is just examples. So this picture is High School of Economics, also one of the most resourceful university in Russia, and this is their main building in Moscow, which looks very kind of, and this is kind of the provincial university in the periphery in Taliati. I just visited it, and then and this is kind of the main campus. So if you go around, there are like buildings that look even more less resourceful. So it kind of shows what is the big gap in the Russian in the Russian academia and how the resources distribute differently. No, there is supposed to be text, and it was here, but I don't know where it is now. Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to remember what was there.
You go one more?
Yeah, but then it changes to the another one. Yeah, I also think, yeah, it's strange. Well, maybe it's, I did it on, I don't have Mac notebook, so maybe that's the case. Okay, so it was something about zooming. Zooming specifically into Ulyanovsk State University, which I did some of my ethnographic work, and then I was drawing from the auto-ethnography because I did my bachelor's there. So it's a story of an educator from Ulyanovsk State University who taught there for 15 years, I think, and then left the university because of the unfavorable working conditions. And then she extensively talked to me about how kind of working conditions worsened within the years, and then following this kind of idea of the Ministry of Higher Education and Science of efficiency, or like what efficiency means in the academia. And because the peripheral universities almost never compete in this kind of research rankings because they don't perform research activities, so they're a bit excluded from this neoliberal market of kind of research competitiveness in academia. So they only teach and they produce kind of subjects for the local labor market. So that's their main goal of the university like this. So they exclude it, and then they're kind of not efficient in this case. So they don't bring resources by themselves, or it's hard for them to acquire some resources for themselves, and then the ministry is pushing themselves towards more efficiency. And because the state control in Russia is very dominant, especially over the smaller universities, and they don't exercise very much freedom, what happens in practice is that ministry has the right to develop the study plans. This is now very detailed, but basically ministry develops the study plans for each program, which details the amount of hours that teachers need to spend on each activity. And the recent change was that the ministry kind of kept the amount of hours the same for the program, but then more and more hours were dedicated to the self-study, which is not paid. So kind of in the end, the diploma looks the same. So you have this kind of these hours dedicated by students to each particular work, but then kind of in the study plan, in the work plan, it's mostly self-study, which is not paid for the to the educators. But then, of course, educators can't perform the same quality of teaching under these circumstances, so they more and more perform free labor in that way. And then, so they can't influence the amount of hours that they are paid for, and they become even more alienated from their work through this technological component that becomes kind of the controlling mechanism over their work. So instead of communicating with the managers or like with those who make decisions directly, they have this computer program like software where like software somehow calculates the hours that they need to spend on each activity by itself. Nobody knows how it calculates it. So I asked educators, they don't know. They just put some, they have this kind of the courses that they need to teach, and then it calculates themselves what they need to do, and they can't influence the amount of hours that they spend. Well, teachers mostly become alienated from their work and then unsatisfied with this demotivating labor and leave university, and then they're supposed to be the quote here. You can imagine here it says they mock us, and by they this educator, for example, meant Moscow and people from Moscow. So like the center of power is in Moscow. They have no control or any participation in the decision making. And it's a bit reminded of this kind of internal colonization arguments, that Moscow is a colonizer, and then they would exploit the regions around it economically, but also in the academic field. So basically this ideology of efficiency and competitiveness, it translates into materialities of academic labor. So I think the most striking input is this effective contracts. I said there was this study plans from the ministry, but there is also this effective contracts that kind of establish your wage according to your performance. And it's interesting because this effective contracts, which is the main goal, is to kind of make the academic subjects more efficient and more profit-making, and then kind of concentrate on what brings money and profit to the university, so research activities and different participation in Western conferences and projects. But it's interesting how it opens up in the authoritarian governance, because these effective contracts are so shady system, so there is no specific guidelines what to like. So you need to prolong this contract, for example, every half a year or every year. So there are no clear guidelines what you're supposed to do in order to receive that and that. So performance, kind of the guidelines for your performance are very shady, and it's used by the government often to exclude some academic subjects that are in opposition to the to the political order from the university. So for example, from this higher school of economics that I showed earlier, last year there were like around I think 30 professors were fired for their political activity, but then the university just said that we reorganized something, and then they were performing efficiently in a way. So they kind of use this neoliberal logic to undertake some political repression. And the same with the gender inequalities, because women are more expected to do this kind of social reproduction labor also in the university, more emotionally involved labor and more administrative labor for caring and taking care of meetings or teaching and stuff. And then it says, this is the extract from my diary, that because the gap in these paid bonuses and the contract system is so big, you can't understand what is actually going into the contract and what is efficient or not. You're always guessing what is expected from you. And then if you are a woman, then it is expected from you being a good girl. And then you always need to think what is actually being a good girl and what you need to do to please your colleagues. Yeah, something disappeared also. But this is, yeah, I'm finishing now, sorry, I'm going over time. But there are different kind of strategies of people to navigate themselves through this environment of neoliberalization and authoritarian politics. So some become compliant subject, and then they express loyalty to the system and to the political system, and that's how they become more successful maybe in the academia, not maybe research-wise, but in administrative sense, they would kind of be promoted to more prestigious administrative roles. There are some resistance strategies. So, for example, using another language in the academia to teach some oppositional politics. Then, for example, there is this gender program in the European University in St. Petersburg, but they don't call it gender. Master program, they call it, as I remember correctly, sociology of medicine and health, I think. And this is basically the gender program. They can't make diplomas of gender, masters of gender studies, for example. They wouldn't be allowed to do it. So they use another language. Some people just escape academia. So, for example, this educator from Ulyanovsk, she just went to work in another institution, and it was the quote, "Don't come working in a Russian university," I think she said in the end of my interview, which I talked to her. Or some people, this is, for example, the feminist project FemTalks by graduates from Moscow State University, and they organize their own kind of project outside of the institutions because they can't do it within the university. And some people, for example, long for the Soviet imaginaries of care, especially those from the provincial university and who actually under more exploitation of the current academic system. So they kind of imagine or they equate the Soviet system with care, the socialist system with care. But then at the same time, some people call this neoliberal restructuring as a more just because it kind of somehow against corruption. So basically what you do, what you perform, and you get for what you perform, instead of kind of more corrupt system maybe that was before. But then kind of those who embrace neoliberal restructuring, they're mostly from the resourceful university. They actually have resources to say that it's more just system. And it was the quote from the male professor from St. Petersburg State University, and he perceives, well, it's a just system because, well, I work hard and then I receive my bonuses, and then, yeah. Yeah, that's all from me. Sorry for being out of time. Yeah, thanks.